economic collapse. We face a series of circumstances the world has never before faced in this combination. From our past, we've seen recessions, oil crisis, even the Great Depression. Yet in the end, we've recovered from them all. The unique set of circumstances we now face present a danger that many haven't considered before now. After all, who could have predicted 2020? No one knew everything that would happen, and no one knows everything that will come. In the midst of a global pandemic, we're also faced with an economic situation that could easily collapse and spiral out of control. Unemployment is already at an alarmingly high rate, and with things getting worse, these rates will most likely continue to rise at increasing levels. We can look at what this nation has experienced in the past and draw from the many similarities. But the part that is most concerning is that with all of the similarities from the past, we have many other conditions that were not present then. Civil unrest at very high levels, social, political turmoil, and the coronavirus, along with everything it brings. This video is focused on looking at steps we need to take now and plans we can put into action that will help us in the future. It's worth knowing that we have survived numerous economic crises in the past, so let's start with the worst that we've experienced. The Great Depression lasted from 1929 to 1941. This was a time of unprecedented economic disaster for the United States. By the early 30s, more than 3,600 banks had gone under. More than 40% of home mortgages were in default, and 1,300 local governments had failed to make obligatory payments. National income had fallen to 54% of its 1929 levels. By 1932, an estimated 28% of the nation's households, which totaled 34 million people at the time, did not have a single employed wage earner. During the Depression, millions of people were out of work across the U.S. Unable to find another job locally, many people hit the road, traveling from place to place, hoping to find work. Some had cars, but most hitchhiked or rode the rails, as it's called. They would board freight trains and crisscross the country, hoping to find a job somewhere along the way. But when there was a job open, there were literally thousands of people applying for that same job. Those who weren't lucky enough to get the job would possibly then have to stay in a shanty town, known as Hoovervilles, outside of the town. Housing in the shantytown was built out of any material that could be found, like driftwood, cardboard, or even newspapers. Just like the shanty towns were named Hoovervilles after the president, newspapers became known as Hoover blankets. Pants pockets were turned inside out to show everyone they were empty to prevent yourself from being robbed. These were called Hoover flags. The major turnaround for the U.S. economy occurred only after the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the entrance of the U.S. into World War II. That was the most severe depression that the world has seen in modern times, but let's take a quick glance at some of the other recessions and difficult times this nation's made it through. The First World War was followed quickly by the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu of 1918 infected as much as 2/5 of the global population and killed between 20 to 50 million people. The U.S. was badly hit by this virus, given that those who died from the flu were typically aged between 15 and 40. The pandemic impacted the most economically active citizens. However, the North American recession ended in July 1921 without any intervention. In fact, the remainder of the 20s was a boom time for the American economy, with GDP per capita increasing from $6,460 to $8,016, earning it the nickname of the Roaring Twenties. The Great Recession officially lasted between 2007 to 2009 in the U.S. This was the longest period of economic decline since the 1930s. This began by the subprime mortgage crisis of 2007. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost more than half its value between fall of 2007 and the spring of 2009. Of another economic downturn. The period between the end of the Great Recession in June 2009 and January of 2020 marked the longest economic expansion in U.S. history. The recession we're in and the depression that may possibly be coming, it's impossible to predict how the world's economies will fare after the coronavirus pandemic and the ensuing depression. This is the crisis we're in, and this is the crisis we face. face. The first thing we can do to prepare ourselves is to ensure we have the basic skills. We have to have our basic survival skills, because if things do take a turn for the worse, and if we are forced to leave our homes, whether through eviction, no matter what the situation is, we're going to need the basic skills such as fire making, such as purification of water, being able to locate and build shelter for ourselves, being able to obtain food, and the basic first aid skills necessary, because in a Great Depression, if turns out to be another depression like the Great Depression, then a lot of people will not have medical care. So having your first aid skills honed is going to be of extreme importance. Another skill that may be often overlooked because it's not used as commonly as it was, and this is a skill that everyone survived on for many, many years, long before the, I guess you would say, invention of money came along, and this is our barter and trading skill. To barter and trade, the first thing is we have to understand the value of the goods, the demand for the goods we have that we're willing to trade, and the value and demand for the goods that we need. Barter and trading skills are people skills. The better you are, the better communicator you are, the more convincing you can be, or generally, I guess you could say, the better salesperson you are, then this skill is going to come much easier for some people than it will for others. Survival gear. But the set of conditions that we're facing right now are completely unique in history. Yes, the Spanish flu hit the U.S. and the world before the Great Depression hit, but that was 10 years apart, and we survived both of those events because they were so far apart. Imagine if the Spanish flu had hit the U.S. during the time of the Great Depression. We still have this global pandemic that we're facing while we're facing this Great Recession. All we can do is base what may happen off of what we know. And what we've seen already in this coronavirus is that the government did step in at the first wave of this, and they did attempt to help people. They put stays on evictions and utility shutoffs. But the real question there is, how long can the government keep that up? Hopefully long enough for this country and the world to recover. But if they can't, then we're going to see a massive amount of people who will become homeless in a very short amount of time. And we're talking about now in the winter time. This is going to be extremely difficult for those people. And that's why survival gear, although you may never need it, needing it that one time, it's going to pay for itself. Another thing that would be worth checking on and worth verifying that you have enough of and you have the proper ones of are your standard tools. These aren't really survival gear related tools. I'm talking more of your automotive tools, your household repair tools, because in a recession, in a depression, I'm not going to be able to pay that mechanic $400 to fix my car when I could do it myself for $50 just buying the part. Not just automotive repair, but home repair. Things are going to break. The depression's not going to hit and going to go away in a week. If it truly does set in, we're looking at years of this. So being able to repair and maintain your own structures, your home, your vehicles, and any other equipment that you have is going to be something that not only will save you money, but it will also give you the peace of mind of knowing that you can take care of the things you do have. Resource manuals and documentation. First, documentation. If you own your home, have your deed. If you own your vehicles, have your titles. Any property that you own, any social security cards, birth certificates, stock certificates, bonds, anything that you have, make sure you have hard physical copies of those types of documentation, or at the very least scan them and put them on a USB or a thumb drive. Resource manuals can be a lifesaver, and this sort of goes back to the tools section we talked about earlier. If I need to make a repair to my vehicle and I can't afford to pay the mechanic, but I do have the tools, having this resource manual, this manual that takes me step by step through that repair of my vehicle, is going to be basically a lifesaver at that point. Things happen, things break, and being able to repair them is going to be not just of importance to your household, but think of the barter capability that gives you. With an economic collapse, it's not like a grid down situation. We're still going to have access to computers. So instead of printing these manuals out, I could actually have a couple of USB drives that stores all of the different types of manuals that I think I may ever need on them. Food. When I think about food, I think about it in three different categories. Our long-term survival food, this is your freeze-dried foods, your MREs, the things that last 10, 20, 25 years. These are what I consider my backup food. This is the type of food that I put back, I store, and if I need it, I'm going to get into it. The second type of food or category that I break it down into is short-term food. And for me, canned goods falls into this category. And it's not because canned goods don't last a while, because some canned goods will outlast some long-term food. But it's because canned goods are what the majority of us are used to eating. So this is something that our body's used to. It's easy to store these up if you're not having to leave your location. You can store up canned goods rather cheaply and rather rapidly. The third category that I look at of food is what I call the self-sufficient category. And this is the category for people who have the space that can grow their own food. Learn the different types of foods that you can plant in the variety of seasons. And that way you'll have a constant supply of food coming in year-round just about. And if you do have the money or the means, then the indoor growing methods, you're going to be able to grow year-round. And this is where preserving and canning comes in. Preserving and canning is a means of basically making our food last longer. So if you are growing your own food, then it's highly recommended that you learn some preserving and canning methods to go along with that, so that you can preserve that food and stretch it out over the duration of, a few months or maybe a year. Hunting and fishing. In the older days, the days before electricity and things like that, this was one of the few methods of putting food on the table. We may very well have to revert back to not just hunting and fishing when we feel like it, but hunting and fishing as a means to support our family. And once again, if you're a good hunter or a good fisherman, then that gives you goods that you can possibly barter with. Everything you have is a barter tool if you play your cards just right. Next is health, physical fitness, and mental fitness. Health and physical fitness, our bodies will fight off diseases, infections, and sickness a lot better when we're in better physical condition than it will if we're not in good physical condition. When it comes to medication, this is always a touchy subject, as far as it's a subject that's, difficult, because some people rely on medication to simply get up in the morning and allow their body to function properly. As people lose their jobs and lose their health insurance, then a lot of people will very well or possibly lose access to this medication that literally will keep them alive in some cases. You may want to attempt to stockpile some medication the best you can, get a month or two in advance if your doctor would give you that. I know for like narcotics and things, they're not going to do that. But for life-saving medication, it is a possibility. You need to talk to your doctor about the risks of using alternative medications, things like that. Talk to them about things you can do to improve that condition if the medication does become scarce. Mental fitness. This is one of the hardest aspects to really get into. And the reason I say that is because everyone's mental state is different. One person can go through a life-altering event and come out, on top. They can come out feeling great. Another person go through something smaller and it breaks them. The mental aspect of this that I see, I worry more about the younger generation. But when you have children that are being raised in the environment that children are being raised in right now, we're starting to see a major increase in suicides in teens, in depression in teens, and things like that. Children, young kids, young adults, they tend to, adapt pretty well to things, but they're having to adapt to something that no one in the world has ever had to adapt to before, is growing up in an environment that none of us had to grow up in. And this is taking its toll on a lot of our children. But the only thing that we can do as role models, as parents, is to show them all the love we can and to spend time with them and let them know that everything's going to be all right. Because there are a lot of studies out there that are showing depression rates, suicide rates, drug use, and this is in adults and teens. Alcohol abuse. This is all on the rise since the coronavirus first took hold of this world. So this is something that we have to factor in. How much more can some people take? Learn the warning signs that your teen, your child, your significant other, whatever situation you're in, learn the warning signs that this person may be experiencing depression, that this person may be suffering inside. But other than that, this is going to be a very difficult aspect, because it's one that is probably the hardest to prepare for. Security. And by security, I mean home security, family security, personal security. Basically, there's 4 factors that we really need to take into consideration when it comes to security. And the first is the fact that in the initial stages of recessions, crime tends to increase. Although towards the end of this recession or depression, as things begin to stabilize, crime does usually tend to decrease at that point. But in the beginning, we're going to see an increase in property crime and violent crime. The best we can do is secure our homes and make sure that we have a home security plan. Make sure that we have the tools, if you will, to defend ourselves in our homes. If we look back at the Depression, people actually walked around with their pockets pulled out of their pants, and this would tell those around them that they didn't have anything. They didn't have anything in their pockets, so it would not be worth robbing them. We have over 330 million, some estimates say up to 350 million people in the U.S., and if 25 to 30% of those people are out of work, due to the Depression, then that is definitely going to increase the levels of crime that we experience now, especially. But if we also couple that with what has been going on in the nation, with the unrest that has been going on, then crime is not only going to increase, it's probably going to skyrocket. We already have seen it skyrocket over the last year. If a depression does set in, this is going to skyrocket even more. Don't go anywhere alone. Remember the survival tactics. Remember some of the things that we should already have developed and things that will come into play in this type of situation. And the first one is the gray man. The gray man, this is the perfect time, if there ever has been a perfect time, to be the gray man. You can walk around now with a mask on your face, a hoodie on your head, and no one will see anything. Put some sunglasses on, no one will even see your face in the slightest. So the time to be the gray man is now. Don't travel alone if at all possible. If you do have to go somewhere, try to make it in groups or at least a team of 2 or 3 people at the bare minimum. Practice situational awareness. Situational awareness is understanding your surroundings and understanding, or at least knowing, what will happen with certain actions you take. If I perform this action, will it cause a reaction that I may not be able to handle? Being the gray man, using situational awareness, can keep you out of a lot of trouble in this type of environment. Blend in. Another aspect that may not be thought of, but for property owners out there, for someone who has, say, a home in the city, and maybe you have a little property in the mountains or outside of the city or something like that, is squatters. What are you going to do when people squat on your property, when people leave the cities? Because if we look at the Great Depression, people migrated from the cities to the rural areas, to the countryside, basically. And we could sort of assume that that's going to happen again. It may not be millions of people, but it doesn't take millions of people, only thousands, in each area to make a huge influx to where resources become strained. Every state, every municipality, every city, they all have their own different set of guidelines or rules or laws on how to deal with, squatters. And that's where you're just going to have to be familiar with your area. Research this a little bit now so you know what ground you do stand on. But also on the same hand, ask yourself, what do you really want to do about this problem? If there's a family squatting on your land because they have nowhere to go, for some people that will be okay. That will be completely acceptable. For other people, it may not be. So this is something that you have to think about if you're a landowner, but also if you're a squatter. If you are a squatter, then you also have to understand that there are some people out there that are not going to want you on their property. And there are some people out there who will not care. So the next two go hand in hand. What happens if you are evicted? I think a lot of people put thought into this. I put a lot of thought into this. What happens if I'm evicted from my home due to the fact that I'm laid off? The government can only put stays on evictions for so long, and I don't expect that to last longer than 3 or 4 months because it's going to break not just the government but the housing market. So they're not going to do that. And it's not just the people who are evicted from their homes, but it's the family members of those people who try to take them in, and now you have a much larger family in a smaller place with less resources. So this is going to be a strain. It's going to be difficult on everyone. No one wants to get evicted from their home, but if you don't put some thought into what you will do, then it's going to come as a shock and a surprise, and then those people who haven't prepared will be at a loss at this point. And you have to ask yourself, what will you do if you wake up and there's that eviction notice on your door and you got 14 days, maybe 30, depending on where you live? This is something that needs to be planned for, and it's something that's hard to plan for. This is where you have to talk to your family members. You may possibly have to, using the words, bug out. You may have to take off. If you're evicted, then you have nowhere to go. So it may be at this time a lot of people will move out of the cities, and they will try to find areas in the rural areas. So that's why it's so important to have a long-term strategy. A long-term strategy can be broken into two parts. One part is basically, what am I going to do with my family? What are we going to do if we are evicted? If I am laid off, if we lose our income, we exhaust our savings, we use all resources we have, and now I'm evicted from my home, what am I going to do now? The second aspect is the financial. This is going to be different for a lot of people. Some people have no family. They have nowhere to go. Some people have family that would gladly take them in. And for each person, this plan is going to be different. But if you don't put some time into a long-term strategy, how you're going to survive in a worst-case scenario, then when that worst-case scenario does come, then you'll be left homeless on the streets with nothing and no plan. The last section is financial preparation. When it comes to financial preparation, there's only so many things a person can do. As we can see through our history, we've had the Great Depression, we've had the Great Recession, we've had multiple other recessions. And in the end, we've recovered from them all. So wishful thinking here is that we will recover from this one. The alternative is the entire world goes into collapse and we go back to a feudal type of society where groups and tribes are all warring against each other for resources and water. Hopefully it won't come to that. So if we do make it through this depression, then those that do have the money to invest may have a very good opportunity here to secure themselves even better for after the depression. So let's look at some ways we can save money. The first and easiest, simplest way to save money is to make more money. Making more money is easier to do than a lot of people may think it is. With the internet these days, making money online has become a thing that a lot of people in the United States and around the world are doing. Now, a lot of the things that we do online are not going to make us a lot of money. For example, some things take a lot more work to make money than other things do. I can sell on eBay and I can sell on Amazon, which I do, and I can make a decent little chunk of change every month. There are a lot of ways to make money online, and I'm not talking about get rich quick schemes. I'm not talking about things like that, but I'm talking about simple things, buying and selling, drop shipping. I'll link a video below that shows 20 different ways that you can make money online. These opportunities are there now. If I wait until I lose my job in a depression, they're not going to be there. So take advantage of the opportunities now. Procrastination is probably the biggest enemy of a prepper. If I wait to prep, then it's going to be too late to prep. And there's so many opportunities to make a few dollars here or there with minimal time and effort. And go back to eBay, for example. I probably clear $400 or $500 a month on eBay. And I put in maybe 8 to 10 hours a month. And that's counting packaging and shipping time. So, that's a nice little return there. Don't forget the places that you can get items cheap that you can sell online. And these would be antique auctions, estate sales, yard sales, thrift stores, flea markets, places like that. Look at these little opportunities that you can sort of tack on to what it is you do already every day, and it will make you a little extra money. I can attest to that because I've made a lot of money online with these marketplaces by buying and selling. I like antiques. I've done a lot with antiques. The next is to cut spending now. Cut spending now, get used to spending less money, and it won't be that much of an impact when you do possibly have to take a wage cut or an hour cut in the initial stages of the depression. The less money you can spend now means the more money you can put back, or the more money you can stockpile some food and some water and some other supplies. Cutting debt is not as easy done as it is said. So cutting our debt really just is plain and simple. It means eliminating any outstanding debt we have. If I have a credit card payment and my minimum payment is $32 a month, then I'm going to try and pay about $40 or $50, so some of that goes to the principal until I can bring those down to zero. Refinancing your credit cards. A lot of times right now, while the market is still at least decent, right now you can probably get a 0% interest rate and transfer your debt from any other credit cards to one credit card, and that'll give you 6 to 12 months to pay that debt off with 0% interest. So that might be something that some people want to look into. Also, it doesn't hurt in this type of situation if you're still paying on your car or you're still paying on your home to see if you can refinance it with a shorter mortgage and possibly a better interest rate than maybe you had gotten, a few years back. This is something that, is going to be different for each individual. And also simple things, the simplest things like saving your change. I realize that for a lot of people that are living day to day, week to week, and it's hard to put money back. It's hard to save your change because eventually you need that money before the end of the week or before the next payday, and I completely understand that. But if it is possible, then try and save your change, or at least your pennies and your nickels and dimes. And this might sound crazy, but it does add up. I've been saving all my change for about 1.5 years now. I mean, every bit of it, pennies, all the silver. And I don't know how much I got in there, but I think I'm probably part of the reason for the coin shortage in the U.S. If at all possible, in your savings or in a rainy day type of fund, have at least 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up. For some people this is possible, for others it's not. And if it is possible, then this is definitely something that you need to do. If not having it saved up, go ahead and pay it ahead. You know, if it's hard to save money, some people will get money in a savings account and it's burning a hole in their pocket and they got to spend it. Well, if that's the case, instead of putting that extra little bit of money in the savings account, put that extra money towards your power bill. Pay it ahead, get a positive balance, so that when you do run out of money, you've got that balance, you've got that buffer, you got that cushion that you can fall back on. Now, there are also options on mortgages and especially like vehicle loans. If worse comes to worse, they will allow you to make just the interest payments for a couple of months and possibly even defer a payment, putting it on the end of the loan. You may want to call your mortgage company or your auto finance company and determine what types of programs are available out there if the economy does get worse. So at least this way you know exactly what you got to work with. Don't wait until it happens, because when it happens, they're not going to as freely offer these. You're going to have to already know about them. And that can be a lifesaver in tough times, because if you have 3 to 6 months ahead that you are, and then worse comes to worse, you can defer 2 or 3 payments, then you're looking at close to a year that you've got a buffer for there. And that could be the difference between keeping your home and being out on the streets. All right, the last part we want to look at are investments. I want to talk about some different investments that those who want to invest for the long term. Now, a recession, depression is terrible for the majority of people, but that doesn't mean every stock in the stock market is going to crash. That doesn't mean every type of fund will tank, because that's just historically not what has happened. There are historically lots of different companies and lots of different types of funds that have overperformed during recession times. But this is also where you have to be careful, because the same things we're going to talk about now perform highly during a recession, during difficult times, but when the economy starts booming, these underperform. So keep that in mind. And for those that play in the stock market a lot, this is probably not going to be anything new to you. But for those who haven't, but those who are contemplating it, I'm going to talk about a few things here. Now, I want you to know, to begin with, this is not financial advice on my part, but all of the information that I'm going to talk about here was gathered from places like J.P. Morgan, Kiplinger. It's coming from some very reputable financial sources. But I'm going to go over some of the things here and just talk very briefly about each one. In times of recession, a lot of investors typically stick to like fixed income investments such as bonds, or dividend yielding investments such as dividend stocks, because they offer routine cash payments. Bonds are very safe. So if you are looking to invest not just for the recession, depression, but for afterwards, then look at things that are going to maintain a good profile now, and that are things like healthcare, utilities, and consumer goods. People are still going to spend money on the doctor. We have no choice sometimes. Household items are a necessity. Electricity, food, water. Regardless of the economy, these things will most likely people will still find a way to pay for these things. Here's a list of the top 20 stocks expected to make it through this upcoming recession and perform very well. Number 1, Walmart. Number 2, Dollar General. Number 3, PepsiCo. Number 4, Hershey. Number 5, Lockheed Martin. Number 6, O'Reilly Automotive. Number 7, Diageo. Number 8, Philip Morris. Number 9, Church & Dwight. Number 10, General Mills. Number 11, Unilever. Number 12, Clorox. Number 13, Procter & Gamble. Number 14, Hormel. Number 15, Costco. Number 16, Kroger. Number 17, McDonald's. Number 18, Rollins. Number 19, Service Corporation International. And number 20, H&R Block. These stocks or these companies have been analyzed by multiple financial institutions, and due to their business models and their strength of their structure, they're expected to do well through a recession or depression. Although we face different types of variables in this upcoming depression than people have faced in the past, and mainly being the fact that we have a global pandemic going on simultaneously, this is not a guarantee that these will still work. There may be other businesses that you want to look at, but just because we go into a recession or a depression does not mean that everything is off the table. We would still have opportunities to invest and still have opportunities to maintain at least a steady stream of income throughout this event. Now, some people will say to focus on reliable dividend stocks, and this is more up my alley right here. Investing in what's called dividend stocks, this can be an excellent way to generate a passive or side income. When you're comparing dividend stocks, getting ready to invest, it's a good idea to look for companies with low debt to equity ratios and strong balance sheets. If you don't know where to start, you may want to look into dividend aristocrats. These are companies that have increased their dividend payouts for at least 25 consecutive years. Number 1 is federal bond funds. Funds made up of U.S. Treasury bonds, these lead the pack. These are considered to be the safest investment that you can make. Investors face no credit risk because the government's ability to levy taxes and print money eliminates the risk of default and provides principal protection. Municipal bond funds. These are issued by state and local governments, and these investments leverage local taxing authority to provide high degree of safety and security to investors. They carry a greater risk than funds backed in securities by the federal government, but they're still considered to be relatively safe. Taxable corporate funds. Taxable bond funds issued by corporations, these are also a possibility. They offer higher yields than the government-backed bonds, but they do carry more risk. While corporate bond funds are riskier than funds that only hold government-issued bonds, they are still less risky than stock funds. When it comes to securing yourself for a recession, bonds are definitely the most popular, but they aren't the only option that we have. Some investors will often put their cash into money market funds. While these funds provide a high degree of safety, they should only be used for short-term investments. Dividend funds. Mutual funds focused on dividends can provide strong returns with less volatility than funds that focus strictly on growth. Utilities mutual funds. Utilities-backed mutual funds are less aggressive stock market fund strategies, and these tend to focus on investing in companies paying predictable dividends. And like we had said before, electricity, gas, water, these are your utility funds, and these are what's going to be around through the recession and after. So these are a good short-term investment to maintain an income. You're not going to grow much with any of these funds, but you're going to maintain an income throughout this recession or depression. Large cap funds. Funds investing in large cap stocks tend to be less vulnerable than those in small cap stocks. As larger companies, they just are generally better positioned to endure tough times. Another investment option is gold and silver. Precious metals like gold or silver, they tend to perform very well during market slowdowns. Since the demand for these types of commodities often increases during recessions, their prices will go up accordingly. You can invest in precious metals in a few different ways. The most straightforward way is to simply buy coins, bars, or bullion from a seller or coin dealer. While this is different than buying a fund or a security, it's as good as any other option, and maybe even better because you actually have it in hand. If you're interested in buying precious metal securities, turn your attention to ETFs. These funds are collections of investments within a single industry. Prior to 1900, the gold to silver ratio fluctuated around 16 to 1, which means it takes 16 ounces of silver to equal the same value as 1 ounce of gold. And this was because gold and silver prices were pretty much fixed, and as a result, the ratio was pretty much fixed as well. Since then, though, commodity prices have been traded on the open market, and as a result, the gold-silver ratio has varied wildly from as high as 100 to 1 to as low as 17 to 1 during silver's peak in 1980. Since 1980, there have been 4 or 5 times the gold-to-silver ratio has exceeded 80 to 1. The first was in 1990, and it lasted for over 3 years. In 2003, the ratio hit 80 to 1 once again. In 2008, the ratio again hit 80 to 1. In March of 2016, the ratio was greater than 80 to 1. And when you bought silver at the 80 to 1 ratio, then you're paying much less for it. When the ratio stabilizes or returns to normal, then you're going to see a 200 to 300 to maybe 350% increase in your profit there. Now, for the 5th time the gold to silver ratio has hit 80, it's an ongoing situation. And it's happening now. Markets have offered that ratio more or less uninterrupted since early 2018. And it's quite likely that there's some good short-term gains to be made here, but the best and most compelling opportunity would only come if the US went into a recession and the ratio remained elevated. Silver prices often fall more quickly than gold prices, and recessions typically do cause short-term declines in precious metal prices as they first set in. But each of the last 3 recessions has seen the gold to silver ratio increase after the onset of the recession. So this is definitely something worth looking into. I'm an advocate of gold and silver. I believe that for an economic collapse, a lot of people say, well, they're not going to trade for gold or silver. Well, maybe in an apocalyptic world, after a nuclear war, gold and silver may not have the value. But in an economic collapse, you can surely bet that gold and silver will be of higher value than they are right now, and you will be able to trade with them, and you will be able to use them to get the supplies you need. Maybe you have a few people that won't trade for gold or silver, but the majority of people will, because with an economic collapse, most people are going to be looking at, we're going to come out of this, and this gold or silver is going to be worth a lot more at that point. Now, one thing to keep in mind is how you store your gold or silver. You can do it through some of the options that we talked about, to where basically your gold or silver, your precious metals, are stored remotely. Or you can store your gold or precious metals at home, physically purchasing these and keeping them in a safe or some area that you want to keep them in. The other option that some people opt for is their safety deposit box. But I offer a word of caution here. Chances are it may not happen, but during extreme crisis, governments can also seize people's gold. There have been some examples of gold confiscation in the past, and most memorably, this happened in the United States in 1933 during the Great Depression. The government seized all gold bullion and coins via Executive Order 6102, forcing citizens to sell at well below market rates. Immediately after the confiscation, the government set a new official rate for gold that was much higher as part of the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. So keep in mind that your gold and silver, theoretically, I'm not saying it will, but theoretically, legally, could still be confiscated, especially if you keep it in a safety deposit box. Under current federal law, gold bullion can be confiscated by the federal government in times of a national crisis. But as far as collectibles, rare coins, these do not fall within the provisions permitting confiscation. So rare coins are another option. But keep in mind that you're going to pay more for a rare gold coin than you would be paying for a bullion of the same weight. Well, those are some things that we need to take into account. Those are some things that we need to think about. Those are some. We also were looking at some opportunities that could open up. An economic collapse, for a lot of people, it's going to feel like the end of the world. For others, it's going to feel like an opportunity. And, it just depends on who you are and how you're sitting right now. Take care of yourself now, and you'll prepare yourself for the future. Well, I hope the video was informative. Tried to touch on a lot of different things here, and hope everybody enjoyed it. God bless. Thanks a lot for watching. And for now, Seer Survivor, out.